The third engine died at 3:47 local, and Merchant Captain Vorth Canis felt the deck shudder beneath his boots like a wounded animal trying to lie down. He was already running. The corridor of the Drevani heavy freighter shelf of tides listed 9 degrees to port, emergency lighting casting everything in that sick amber glow that meant the power grid was rationing itself. Behind him, the intercom crackled with the voice of his first engineer, Paulith, and she was saying something Vorth had hoped never to hear on any voyage. Number 3 is gone. Thermal coupling shattered. We're down to 1, Captain, and she's running hot. 1 engine, 12 ships in the convoy. The Peloric deep stretching in every direction like the universe had forgotten to put anything in it. No stations, no relay markers, no comm buoys for 14 hours of transit in any direction. Vorth slammed through the bridge hatch and took in the damage board at a glance. The main display showed the convoy in formation, 12 Drevani merchant haulers arranged in a standard dispersal pattern, his shelf of tides at the center because she was the heaviest and slowest, and therefore the one everyone else paced themselves against. 3 of the 12 engine status indicators glowed red. Not 3 ships, 3 engines on his ship alone. "How long on number 4?" he asked, dropping into the command chair. His navigator, a young Drevani female named Sorenthi, turned from her console with the kind of expression that answered the question before her mouth opened. "Paulith says 90 minutes, maybe less if we push above 30% thrust." "What killed 2 and 3? Sorenthi pulled up the engineering telemetry. The cascade was laid out in harsh amber lines. Engine 2 had thrown a thermal coupling at 3:09, 40 minutes ago. The automated shutdown had surged residual heat through the shared coolant manifold into Engine 3's coupling housing, weakening the ceramic until it fractured under normal load. 2 failures, 38 minutes apart, one causing the other like dominoes toppling in a furnace. "Sequential thermal cascade," Sorenthi said. "Engine 1 went cold during our first transit hour bearing seizure. Paulith had flagged it as non-critical because we still had 3 remaining. 3 had become 1. Vorth looked at the status board and did the math that every merchant captain learned to do in the deep. Remaining engine life versus remaining transit distance versus cargo viability versus the nearest help. The math did not work. 90 minutes of engine life on a vessel carrying 400 tons of tessarine medical compounds, irreplaceable, temperature-sensitive, bound for the colony at Verath Minor, where a respiratory plague had already killed 11,000 people. The tessarine synthesis facilities on the inner worlds had taken 6 months to produce this shipment. There would not be another for 3. Vorth opened his eyes. "Get me the convoy master." The convoy master was aboard the Terrace of Winds, the fastest of the 12 ships, and her name was Overseer Delenn Roth. She appeared on the comm display looking like she had not slept since the Peloric transit began, which was probably true. Nobody slept well in the deep. The void between recognized shipping lanes had a way of pressing against the hull. "Canis, I see your boards from here," Delenn said. "Your bleeding power." 3 engines gone. Thermal couplings. The 4th is overheating and Paulith gives me 90 minutes before she seizes. Delenn's jaw tightened. She was a Drevani through and through, tall, lean. Her mottled gray-green skin pulled taut over angular cheekbones. Her 4 fingers drumming the armrest of her chair in that unconscious rhythm all Drevani captains developed after decades in the deep. "Can your other ships tow me?" Vorth asked, already knowing the answer. "Your cargo mass is 400 tons. The next heaviest tow-rated vessel in formation is the Amber Crest at 160. She'd burn her own couplings inside an hour." Delenn's eyes dropped to something off-screen. "I'm looking at options, Canis. There aren't many." Vorth pulled up the navigation chart. The Peloric Deep was exactly what its name suggested, a region of interstellar void between the Drevani corridor and the outer shipping lanes. 14 hours of nothing in every direction. No fuel depots. No emergency stations, not even a derelict to shelter against. The Drevani Trade Authority maintained a single relay buoy at the deep center, and the convoy had passed it 6 hours ago. The relay buoy, Vorth said, if I send a distress hail through it. The relay's range covers Drevani corridor traffic. Our trade authority dispatch could have a tug here in 22 hours at best. Delenn paused. Your engine has 90 minutes. Vorth stared at the chart. 22 hours against 90 minutes was not a calculation. It was a death sentence for his engine, and without his engine, the shelf of tides would drift. The medical cargo would begin degrading the moment the ship's environmental systems failed. At current temperatures, the tessarine compounds had a viability window of 6 hours without active cooling. The plague at Varath Minor would keep killing. There's another option, Sorrenthy said quietly from her navigation console. Both captains looked at her. The relay buoy, its broadcast envelope, it has side lobes. Sorrenthy pulled up a frequency diagram on the main display. The primary beam is aimed down the corridor toward Drevani dispatch, but the antenna's side lobe pattern bleeds laterally. There's a secondary emission lobe that extends. She traced a line on the chart. Here. Into the Terran patrol margin. Silence on the bridge. That's a side lobe, Delenn said flatly. Signal degradation would be 70–80%, and the Terrans don't monitor Drevani distress frequencies. They monitor everything, Sorrenthy said, so quietly it was almost to herself. Vorth looked at the young navigator. Sorrenthy was barely into her 3rd decade, young for a deep transit posting, but she had come from the Drevani-Terran border stations, where the two species shipping lanes occasionally overlapped. She had worked alongside human navigators. She had stories about them that the older crew dismissed as exaggeration. Even if a human vessel picked up a degraded side lobe from a Drevani relay buoy, Vorth said carefully, they would have no obligation to respond. We are not in their jurisdiction. We are not on their frequency. We did not call them. Sorrenthy turned back to her console. No, Captain, we did not. The 4th engine's temperature climbed 6 degrees in the next 12 minutes. Vorth made the call, not because he believed in it, because 90 minutes was not enough time to believe in anything except trying. He composed the distress hail himself, standard Drevani Trade Authority format, identifying the shelf of tides, the convoy, the cargo, the engine failure, the medical emergency at destination. He addressed it to Drevani Corridor Dispatch, because that was where the relay buoy's primary beam was aimed. He did not address it to Earth. He did not address it to any human authority. The hail was aimed at his own people, through his own relay, on his own frequency. The side lobe was physics. The side lobe was an antenna pattern bleeding signal energy in an unintended direction. The side lobe was not a call for help. He sent it. The relay buoy acknowledged receipt at 4:13. Signal transmitted on primary beam toward corridor dispatch. Estimated response time. Processing. The relay did not mention its own side lobes. Relay buoys were not designed to know about their own side lobes. They were not designed to bleed signal energy laterally into adjacent patrol margins. They were not designed to summon help from species that had never been invited into the Drevani emergency network. Physics did not require an invitation. While the relay processed, Vorth opened the convoy's shared data channel and checked the other ship's engine readouts. The 11 remaining haulers were running within normal parameters, but 2 of them, the Amber Crest and the Cresting Shoal, showed elevated coupling temperatures. The Peloric Deep was hard on machinery. The void between lanes carried dust so fine it was invisible to scanners, but accumulated in engine housings over the course of a 14-hour transit, grinding against thermal surfaces like a slow file. Paulith had warned the Trade Authority about the Deep's particulate loading 6 years ago. Her report had been acknowledged, filed, and neither acted upon nor forgotten. It simply existed in the bureaucratic middle ground where accurate warnings went to be technically on record while practically ignored. And then he went to work trying to save his ship the old-fashioned way. The next 40 minutes were the longest of Vorth Canny's career. He had been a merchant captain for 31 years, had run the Peloric deep transit 17 times, had weathered micrometeorite punctures and cargo hold decompressions, and one memorable encounter with a Kev raider flotilla that he still did not discuss in front of his crew. None of that compared to watching a single engine die by degrees, while 400 tons of medicine sat in his hold, and an entire colony counted the days until a cure arrived. Paulith, his first engineer, was magnificent. She rerouted coolant from systems she deemed expendable: the galley, the crew quarters heating, 2 of the 3 cargo elevators. She stripped thermal plating from the interior walls of the engine housing and bolted it around the coupling mount as improvised heat shielding. She burned her hands twice doing it and did not stop. The engine's temperature climbed anyway. At 425, the coupling housing cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A hairline fracture that Paulith found by pressing her bare palm against the casing and feeling the vibration change. She pulled Vorth down to the engine bay to show him, and in the amber emergency light, the crack was barely visible, a dark line running across the thermal coupling like a fault line waiting for an earthquake. "How long?" Vorth asked. Paulith wiped engine grease and blood from her burned fingers. "At current output, maybe an hour. If I drop thrust to 15%, maybe 2. 15% thrust won't maintain formation with the convoy." "No." Vorth looked at the cracked coupling. 400 tons of tessarine medical compounds. 11,000 dead at Verath Minor. The convoy could not wait for him. The convoy had its own schedule, its own fuel constraints, its own narrow window to reach port before their own engines began to feel the strain of an extended deep transit. He climbed back to the bridge and called Delenn. "Break formation," he said. "Take the convoy ahead. Leave me the Amber Crest as a lifeboat if my hull goes dark, and get those 11 ships to Verath Minor." Delenn stared at him through the comm display. "Your cargo is half the shipment, Canny's. The other half reaches the colony. 11,000 dead becomes 15,000 maybe instead of 40. That's the math." "That's not math, that's sacrifice." "It's the Peloric deep, Delenn. It's always sacrifice." The convoy broke formation at 4:38. 11 ships pulled ahead, their engines flaring in the darkness, leaving the shelf of tides and the small escort vessel Amber Crest drifting at 15% thrust. Vorth watched them go from the bridge viewport, 11 sets of engine signatures dwindling to points of light, then nothing. The deep swallowed them. The captain of the Amber Crest was a young Dravani named Toril Vess, barely into his second command posting, and his voice on the comm carried the particular tightness of a junior officer who understood that his ship was now the only thing between a crippled freighter and oblivion. "Shelf of tides, I'm holding station at 800 meters. My medical bay can take 40 of your crew if it comes to evacuation. That's all I have room for." "My crew complement is 26, Vorth said. "That's enough." "What about the cargo?" "If the engine fails, the environmental systems go. The cargo degrades. Nothing your ship can do about that." Toril was quiet for a beat. "Then I hope your engine holds, Captain." At 4:41, the coupling temperature ticked up another 2 degrees. Paulith's voice came over the intercom steady, professional, the voice of an engineer who had spent her career keeping old machines running past their intended lifetimes. "Captain, I've sealed the hairline fracture in the coupling housing with thermal paste. It's a patch. The coupling was designed for a 12-year service life. It's at 11.5. Every degree we add is a degree borrowed." "How much time does the patch buy us?" "Maybe 30 additional minutes if we hold at 15%. If anything shakes the housing, a thrust correction, a course change, a gravity eddy, the pace fails, and we lose the last engine inside of 10 minutes. Vorth processed that. They were drifting in the Peloric deep on borrowed time, held together by thermal paste on a coupling that should have been replaced 6 months ago. Maintain 15%. No thrust corrections. We drift on the current vector. Understood. And then there was silence. The silence of the Peloric deep was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of a region that no species had ever bothered to settle, to chart beyond the minimum, to light with beacons or relay stations. It was the silence of emptiness that existed because nobody needed it. Vorth sat in his command chair and watched the engine temperature display and tried not to count the minutes. The amber crest held her position like a sentinel, 800 meters to starboard, her running lights the only other sign of life in a trillion cubic kilometers of void. At 4:47, the environmental system alerted. Cargo Bay 3, where the densest tessarine compounds were stored, had risen half a degree above optimal. The cooling systems were drawing from the same power grid that fed the struggling engine. Physics was choosing what to starve. Vorth rerouted auxiliary power from the crew recreation compartment and the secondary bridge displays. The temperature in Cargo Bay 3 stabilized. The bridge went dim. Sorrenthy worked by the glow of her primary navigation screen alone. At 4:59, Sorrenthy made a sound. It was not a gasp. It was not a word. It was the kind of small, involuntary breath that a navigator makes when something appears on her scope that should not be there. Captain. Vorth looked at her console. I have a contact, single vessel, bearing 117 by 042 range, 14,000 kilometers and closing. Velocity, she paused, rechecked again. Velocity is very high, Captain. She's decelerating hard. Identification. Sorrenthy's fingers moved across the console. The contact's transponder return populated her display, and for a moment she just looked at it. Then she turned to Vorth, and her expression was the one he would remember for the rest of his life. Terran Maritime Patrol, Frigate class, hull designation TSV 4471. She's broadcasting on Terran emergency bands. Sorrenthy swallowed. She's broadcasting our distress hail back to us, Captain, our hail, with a Terran acknowledgement header attached. Vorth stared at the display. The contact was decelerating into their position at a rate that suggested the vessel had been running at maximum thrust for some time. The bearing indicated it had come from the direction of the Terran patrol margin, the edge of human-monitored space that bordered the Peloric deep. That's impossible, Vorth said. Our hail went through the Drevani relay. The primary beam is aimed at corridor dispatch. The Sidelobe, Captain. The Sidelobe is a 70% degraded bleed pattern. No one monitors sidelobes. Someone did. The Terran frigate decelerated into visual range at 5:07. Vorth watched it through the bridge viewport and felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. The ship was small. By Drevani merchant standards, it was barely larger than his engine, housing a compact, angular hull that looked like it had been designed to do exactly one thing and do it well. The hull plating was scarred. Not battle damage, but the accumulated weathering of a vessel that spent its time in the margins, in the empty spaces between lanes, in the places that nobody bothered to patrol because there was nothing there worth patrolling. Except apparently there was. The frigate matched velocity with the shelf of tides at a distance of 200 meters and held position with a precision that spoke of excellent piloting or excellent automated systems or both. A light blinked on the comm console, an incoming hail. Vorth opened the channel. The face that appeared on the display was human, female, dark hair pulled back, a face that carried the particular kind of tiredness that comes from being alert for too many hours in a row. She wore a uniform jacket with insignia. Vorith did not recognize Terran Maritime Patrol, whatever that was. Behind her, the bridge of the frigate was small, functional, and crewed by what appeared to be fewer than a dozen people. Shelf of Tides, this is Commander Anara Reith, Terran Maritime Patrol Vessel Blackwater Run. We picked up your distress hail on a degraded sidelobe from your relay buoy at the Peloric center mark. Your signal was addressed to Drevani Corridor Dispatch. She paused. We are not Drevani Corridor Dispatch. No, Vorith said, you are not. Your hail indicates engine failure, medical cargo at risk, and a colony emergency at destination. Is that current? It is current. My fourth and last engine is failing, thermal coupling fracture. My engineer estimates perhaps an hour at reduced thrust. Commander Reith looked at something off-screen. When she looked back, her expression had not changed, but something in her eyes had sharpened. Captain, I have an engineering team of 4. My vessel carries a standard emergency repair kit that includes thermal coupling blanks rated for Terran drives. Drevani couplings are a different specification, but my chief engineer is telling me the bore diameter is within tolerance if we machine an adapter sleeve. He says he can do that in about 45 minutes. Vorith blinked. You carry coupling blanks on a patrol frigate. We carry everything on a patrol frigate, Captain. That's the point of a patrol frigate. There was a pause. Vorith became aware that his crew, Sorinthi, the helm officer, the 2 sensor operators were all staring at the comm display. He became aware that the amber crest, holding position a kilometer away, had also opened a channel and was listening. Commander Reith, Vorith said, we did not call you. No, you called Drevani Corridor Dispatch. Your relay buoy's sidelobe bled the signal into our monitoring band. One of my comm operators caught it during a routine sweep. Reith glanced sideways at someone off-screen. She almost classified it as noise. Why didn't she? Because she's good at her job. Vorith let that sit for a moment. Then he said, your engineering team, how do they board my vessel? We have a short-range personnel shuttle, zero-gravity transfer at close range. My engineer, a machinist, and 2 technicians. They'll need access to your engine housing and whatever workshop your ship has for fabricating the adapter sleeve. My engineer Paulith will meet them at the docking collar. Good, Reith paused again. Captain, one more thing. You mentioned a colony medical emergency at Verath Minor. What's the cargo? 400 tons of tessarine medical compounds, temperature sensitive, 6-hour viability window once environmental systems fail. Something passed across Reith's face. It was not pity. It was not concern. It was the expression of a professional recalculating priorities. We'll work fast, she said, and closed the channel. The next 90 minutes were an education. Vorith Canis had worked alongside Drevani engineers his entire career. He had watched his own people solve problems with meticulous planning, careful deliberation, and the kind of methodical precision that the Drevani Trade Authority trained into every certified shipwright. Drevani engineering was elegant. It was thorough. It was, on average, very slow. The humans were not slow. The personnel shuttle docked at the Shelf of Tides' starboard collar at 5:19. 4 figures came aboard Chief Engineer Marcos Delgado, a stocky man with graying hair and hands that had clearly spent decades inside engine housings, a machinist named Wen whose first action upon entering the ship was to ask for the coupling's exact bore specifications, and 2 technicians whose names Vorith never learned because they disappeared into the engine bay and did not surface for the next 80 minutes. Paulith met them at the docking collar. Later, she would describe the encounter to Vorith in the quiet hours after everything was over, and the tone of her voice would carry something that was not quite awe and not quite bewilderment, but lived in the territory between them. The big one Delgado, he looked at the cracked coupling for about 10 seconds, she told Vorith. Then he said, I've seen worse. Then he asked for my workshop. Paulith had a workshop. It was not much, a converted cargo bay with a lathe, a press, and a welding rig that predated the shelf of Tides herself. The Terran machinist, looked at the lathe the way a musician might look at an antique instrument, with respect for its age and quiet confidence that she could make it sing. The adapter sleeve was the problem. Drevani thermal couplings used a bore diameter of 14.7 standard units. Terran coupling blanks were bored to 14.2. The difference, half a standard unit, was enough to make a direct replacement impossible. But Wen had brought a precision ring gauge, a set of carbide cutting tools, and the kind of calm patience that came from machining tolerances under pressure as a daily occupation. She set up the lathe, clamped the Terran coupling blank, and began cutting the adapter sleeve while Delgado and his 2 technicians dismantled the cracked Drevani coupling from the engine mount. The removal was the dangerous part. The coupling sat at the junction between the engine's reaction chamber and the thrust nozzle array, a component under residual heat, even with the engine at idle. Delgado's 2 technicians, a lanky young man whose name tag read Park and a woman whose tag read Oduya, worked with thermal gloves rated for temperatures that would blister Drevani's skin. They moved with the economical coordination of people who had done this before, not on this type of engine, but on engines, which was apparently enough. Paulith hovered. She could not help it. This was her engine, her ship, her responsibility for the last 9 years. Watching strangers dismantle a component she had nursed through 17 deep crossings triggered every protective instinct a Drevani engineer possessed. Delgado noticed. He did not say anything about it. He simply began narrating what he was doing quietly, without condescension, the way an experienced surgeon narrates for a colleague observing an unfamiliar procedure. Backing off the retention bolts in pairs. Your mount uses a compression flange with a locking ring that's actually a cleaner design than ours. The ring distributes force better. He freed a bolt. This one's cross-threaded, probably happened during the last installation. Not critical, but it would have added stress to the coupling over time. Paulith stepped closer. Can I see that? Delgado handed her the cross-threaded bolt without hesitation. Paulith examined it, turning it under the emergency light. Her expression shifted from protectiveness to something more clinical. The installation was done at the Trade Authority yard, she said. 11 years ago. I wasn't aboard yet. It happens. Cross-threading on a deep bolt in a compression flange. You'd never catch it unless you pulled the whole coupling, and nobody pulls couplings that aren't failing. Until they fail. Until they fail. In the workshop, Wen's lathe sang. The carbide tool bit into the Terran coupling blank with a high, clean note that resonated through the deck plating. Paulith's apprentice, a young Drevani named Hasseth who had been standing in the corridor trying to be useful, gravitated toward the sound and watched with undisguised fascination as Wen cut the adapter sleeve to specification. Wen did not look up from her work. The bore tolerance on this needs to be within 0.02 standard units, she said, apparently to the room at large. Your lathe spindle has about 0.01 of runout. That's tight but workable. You can feel the runout? Hasseth asked. I can hear it. Wen adjusted the feed rate by a fraction. The note of the cutting tool changed. There, that's centered. Vorth watched from the engine bay catwalk. Below him, his own engineer and the 4 humans worked in the amber emergency lighting like surgeons around a patient. They did not waste words. Delgado spoke to Paulith in short, precise sentences, requesting tools, confirming measurements, asking about the engine's coolant routing so he could plan the reinstallation sequence. Paulith answered in the same register. They were 2 engineers from 2 different species who had never met before and would probably never meet again, and they worked together as though they had been doing it for years. The cracked coupling came out at 5:41. Delgado held it up to the emergency light and examined the fracture. "Thermal fatigue," he said. "This coupling was stressed before you entered the deep. How old is it?" 11 years in service, Paulith said. "The trade authority inspection cycle is every 12. Delgado looked at her. 12. Standard interval. He set the cracked coupling down carefully, as though it were evidence. "We replace ours every 4. That was all he said about it. He did not editorialize, he did not lecture. He stated a fact, and the fact spoke for itself, and then he moved on to the next problem. The adapter sleeve came off Wen's lathe at 5:58, a polished ring of machined alloy, precisely 0.25 standard units thick, bored to 14.7 on the inner face and 14.2 on the outer. Wen presented it to Paulith for inspection. Paulith measured it with her own calipers, checked the surface finish, tested the fit against the Terran coupling blank. "It's perfect," Paulith said. "It's functional," Wen corrected. "Perfect would have taken another hour." The installation began at 6:03. This was the part that could not be rushed. The thermal coupling was the interface between the engine's reaction mass and its thrust generation system, a component under extreme thermal stress during operation, and one that would fail catastrophically if the adapter sleeve did not seat correctly. Delgado took the lead. He positioned the coupling blank with its adapter sleeve into the engine mount, aligned the bolt pattern, and began torquing the fasteners in a specific sequence that Paulith recognized. "You're using a star pattern," she said. "Distributes clamping load evenly across the flange face. We use a sequential pattern, 1 through 12. Delgado paused with his torque wrench on bolt number 6. "Does that work?" "It works. We've been doing it for 60 years. He resumed torquing. "Our way distributes load more evenly, less likely to warp the flange under thermal cycling." Again, no lecture, no superiority, just the statement delivered with the same flat professional tone, and then the wrench moving to the next bolt. At 6:21, the new coupling was seated. Delgado ran his hands over the assembly, literally ran his bare palms over the metal, the same way Paulith had found the crack, and nodded. "Bring your coolant back online. Slowly. Let the coupling heat soak for 10 minutes before you bring the engine above idle." Paulith relayed the instruction to the bridge. Vorith, who had been watching from the catwalk, descended to the engine bay deck and approached the human chief engineer. "Chief Delgado." The human straightened. Up close, Vorith noticed details he had missed on the comm display: the calluses on Delgado's fingers, the small burned scars along his forearms, the trace of machine oil worked permanently into the creases of his knuckles. This was a man who fixed things as a way of life. "Captain, how did you know our coupling bore diameter?" Delgado blinked. "I didn't. Wen measured it after we removed the cracked one. She machined the sleeve to match." "In 40 minutes. Wen is fast." "Your commander said you were on a routine patrol when you intercepted our signal." "That's correct. A routine patrol of the Peloric deep margin. The Terran Maritime Patrol monitors the margins of all adjacent transit regions. Standard operating procedure." Vorith studied the human's face. There was nothing performative in it. No pride, no display, no awareness that he had just performed a small miracle in a stranger's engine bay using equipment from a different civilization. He looked like a man who had finished a job and was waiting to see if there was another one. "Chief Delgado," Vorith said, "this is not your jurisdiction. This is not your shipping lane. We are not your people. Our distress hail was not addressed to you." Delgado looked at him for a long moment. Then he shrugged a small, economical movement of the shoulders. "You had a busted coupling and a hold full of medicine," he said. "That's not really a jurisdiction question." The engine came online at 6:37. Paulith brought it up slowly, exactly as Delgado had instructed, idle for 10 minutes while the coupling heat soaked, then a gradual increase in thrust. The temperature readings climbed, steadied, held. The vibration pattern was clean. The adapter sleeve sat true. At 6:49, the shelf of tides was running at 70% thrust on her repaired engine. Not full power, Delgado had recommended keeping it below 80 until a proper coupling could be installed at port, but 70% was enough to maintain convoy formation speed. Vorth stood on his bridge and watched the numbers stabilize and felt something he had not expected to feel. Not relief. Relief was what came after the danger had fully passed, and they were still 14 hours from port. What he felt was the ground shifting under a belief he had held for 31 years. The Drevani Trade Authority had a protocol for everything. Every contingency was charted, every response time calculated, every jurisdiction precisely delineated. When a Drevani vessel failed in the Peloric Deep, the protocol was clear. Send a hail to corridor dispatch, wait for the response, manage the situation with available resources until help arrived within the established time frame. 22 hours. That was the protocol. 22 hours for a tug from the nearest corridor station. 22 hours during which the medical cargo would have degraded beyond use. 22 hours during which the plague at Verath Minor would have continued killing. A human frigate had crossed a jurisdictional boundary, picked a degraded Sidelobe signal out of background noise, machined a custom adapter in a stranger's workshop, and put the shelf of tides back underway in under 2 hours. And they had not been called. That was the part Vorth could not reconcile. Not the speed, not the competence, not even the casual way Delgado had shrugged off the jurisdictional question as though it were beside the point. It was the fact that the Sidelobe was an accident of physics. The signal was not aimed at them. The frequency was not theirs. The relay buoy was not built for them to hear. They heard it anyway. While the engine heat soaked, Vorth descended to the cargo hold. He walked the aisles between the Tessarine canisters, row after row of temperature-controlled medical containers, each one stenciled with the Verath Minor colonial seal and the batch designation of the synthesis facility that had produced them. The environmental readout on each canister showed green, temperature nominal, viability intact. 400 tons, 6 months of production, enough to treat the respiratory plague for a population of 2 million. He put his hand on one of the canisters. It was cool to the touch. The cooling system was working because the engine was working, because a human machinist had cut an adapter sleeve in 40 minutes on a Drevani lathe that was older than she was. Hasseth, Paulith's apprentice, found him in the cargo hold. The young engineer was holding a data pad with the coupling temperature readings. Stable, Captain. Delgado's star pattern torque sequence is distributing load more evenly than our standard method. Paulith is. She's recalculating our entire torque protocol. Is she angry about it? She's a Drevani engineer. She's angry that it works better and she didn't think of it. Hasseth paused. Captain, the Terran technician Park, he left diagnostic notes in our system format. He translated his notations into Drevani engineering shorthand. How did he know our shorthand? I asked him. He said he studied Drevani maintenance manuals when he transferred to the Peloric Margin Patrol. Just in case, he said. Just in case. A Terran technician had studied Drevani engineering notation in the event that his patrol frigate encountered a Drevani vessel in distress on the margins of a transit corridor that was not part of his jurisdiction. Not because he was ordered to. Because the possibility existed, and he was the kind of person who prepared for possibilities. Vorth climbed back to the bridge. Commander Reith contacted the shelf of tides at 6:52, after her engineering team had shuttled back to the Blackwater run. Captain Cannies, your engine is holding. Holding at 70%. My engineer is monitoring the coupling temperature. Good, we've updated our patrol log with your convoy's route and cargo status. If your engine gives you trouble again before you reach port, broadcast on Terran Emergency Band 14.7. That's our monitoring frequency for this margin. Vorth felt his jaw tighten. Commander Reith, I need to understand something. Go ahead. Your vessel was on a routine patrol of the Peloric margin. Your comm operator intercepted a degraded Drevani distress hail on a relay sidelobe. That signal was addressed to our own dispatch authority. It was not addressed to any Terran entity. You had no obligation to respond. That's correct. You diverted your patrol, crossed into non-Terran transit space, performed an engine repair on a foreign merchant vessel using improvised components, and resumed your patrol. Vorth paused. Why? Reith looked at him with that same steady, unperformative expression her chief engineer had worn in the engine bay. Captain, my comm operator flagged your signal. My engineer said he could fix the problem. Your cargo is medicine for a dying colony. She paused. That's 3 facts. None of them require a jurisdiction analysis. Vorth considered this. He considered 31 years of Drevani Trade Authority protocols, jurisdiction maps, delineated response boundaries, careful allocation of rescue resources to designated zones. He considered the 22 hours it would have taken Corridor Dispatch to send a tug that would have arrived too late. Commander Reith, he said, I am grateful. Don't be. Just get that cargo to port. She paused again, and for the first time the corner of her mouth moved not quite a smile, but the suggestion that one existed somewhere behind the professional mask. And tell your trade authority to shorten their coupling inspection interval. 4 years, not 12. The channel closed. The Blackwater run held position alongside the shelf of tides for another 20 minutes, long enough to confirm that the engine repair was stable, that the coupling temperature was not climbing, that the environmental systems were maintaining cargo viability. During those 20 minutes, a secondary message arrived from the Blackwater run, not from Reith, but from her comm officer. A data packet addressed to the shelf of Tides' navigation system. Sorrenthy opened it and stared at her display. Captain, they've sent us a chart. A chart of what? The Peloric deep margin, Terran maritime patrol frequency assignments, monitoring schedules, and emergency contact protocols for every listening post within 3 transit hours of our current route. Sorrenthy's voice was very quiet. They've given us their patrol map. Vorth looked at the data. It was not classified in any traditional sense. Patrol routes and emergency frequencies were the kind of information any competent naval service would share with vessels transiting adjacent space. But the Drevani Trade Authority had never asked for it. The Trade Authority had never established a data-sharing protocol with the Terran Maritime Patrol. The Trade Authority had never, in 31 years of Peloric deep transits, acknowledged that the Terran patrol margin existed as a potential resource. The humans had sent the chart anyway. Save it to our navigation database, Vorth said. Primary access. That's, Captain, our standard database doesn't have a category for Terran patrol data. Create one. Then the frigate's engines flared, and she pulled away on a vector that took her back toward the Terran patrol margin. Vorth watched her go. The frigate's hull caught the light of a distant star, just a glint, a flash of reflected illumination on scarred plating, and then she was gone, and the Peloric deep was empty again. Sorrenthy spoke first. Captain, the convoy. Should we attempt to rejoin formation? Vorth pulled up the navigation chart. The convoy had been running at standard speed for over 2 hours. At 70% thrust, the shelf of tides could close the gap in approximately 4 hours. Set course, best speed. Contact Overseer Roth on the convoy master channel and tell her we're coming. Yes, Captain. Sorrenthy paused with her hands on the console. What should I tell her about the repair? Vorth thought about it. He thought about how to explain to Dylan Roth that a human frigate had appeared in the Peloric deep, because a relay buoy's antenna had physics, because a sidelobe had bled a signal into the wrong frequency band, because a comm operator had been good at her job, because an engineer had shrugged and said it wasn't really a jurisdiction question. Tell her, Vorth said, that we received assistance. From Corridor Dispatch. No. From whom, then? Vorth looked at the empty patch of deep where the Blackwater run had been. The stars there were the same as everywhere else in the transit corridor. Nothing to indicate that a ship had been. Nothing to indicate that a patrol existed at the margins, running standard operating procedures in regions where there was nothing to patrol. From a vessel that was not called, Vorth said, on a frequency that was not ours, in a jurisdiction that was not theirs. He paused. Tell her exactly that. The hours that followed were the quietest of the transit. The shelf of tides ran at 70%, her single repaired engine pushing 400 tons of medicine through the void at a speed that would have been unremarkable under normal power but felt miraculous on a hand-machined adapter sleeve. Paulith ran diagnostics every 15 minutes. The coupling temperature held steady. Wend's tolerance was holding. At 8:30, the Amber Crest's Captain Toril Vess contacted Vorth on a private channel. Captain Cannies, I've been thinking about what happened. About the repair. About the response time. I pulled the logs. Your distress hail was transmitted through the relay buoy at 4:11. The Terran frigate's first deceleration burn registers on my sensors at 4:43. That's 32 minutes from signal intercept to full-speed burn toward our position. Vorth had not done that calculation. He did it now. 32 minutes, he repeated. To intercept a degraded sidelobe signal, decode a Drevani Trade Authority distress format they have no reason to have in their database, confirm the location, assess whether to respond, and go to maximum thrust. Their decision loop is 32 minutes, Captain. Our trade authority's decision loop from signal receipt to tug dispatch is a minimum of 4 hours, usually 6. I know. Why is that? Vorth looked at the empty deep outside his viewport. Because the trade authority routes the distress hail through corridor dispatch, which routes it to the nearest certified rescue contractor, which routes it through the insurance verification system, which routes it to the jurisdiction assessment office, which issues the dispatch order. And the Terrans. The Terrans apparently hear you and come. Toril was quiet for a moment. I'm including the response time comparison in my own report. Good. The shelf of tides rejoined the convoy at 11:04. Overseer Roth hailed immediately. Cannies, I have 11 ships that need to hear this. How is your engine running on a repair that was performed by a species that doesn't use our coupling specifications? She's running at 70%. The adapter sleeve is clean. My engineer is impressed. Your engineer is never impressed. Paulith is impressed. A pause on the channel. Who were they? Terran Maritime Patrol. A single frigate on a routine margin patrol. Commander named Reith. She had a chief engineer who brought coupling blanks on a patrol vessel because, in her words, that's the point of a patrol frigate. How did they hear us? They didn't hear us. They heard the relay buoy's sidelobe, a secondary emission pattern bleeding into their monitoring band. My navigator Sorrenthi identified the possibility. I sent the distress hail to corridor dispatch through the relay. The sidelobe carried a degraded copy into Terran space. Dylan Roth was quiet for a long time. Vorth could see her on the comm display, the mottled gray-green skin, the angular features, the 4 fingers no longer drumming the armrest. They were still. You sent the hail to our own dispatch, she said. Yes. Through our own relay. Yes. And a human frigate heard the leak. The sidelobe, yes. And they came. They came. Another pause. Corridor dispatch responded 17 minutes ago, by the way. They've acknowledged our original distress hail. Estimated tug arrival at our last reported position, 20 hours from now. Vorth felt something tighten and release in his chest. 20 hours. The tug would arrive at a position the convoy had left 9 hours ago, to find empty space and a Sidelobe echo, because a human frigate had already solved the problem and gone back to its patrol. 20 hours, Vorth repeated. 20 hours. The human was there in 70 minutes? From signal intercept to docking, approximately 68 minutes. Delen's four fingers began drumming again. I'm going to include this in my convoy report to the Trade Authority. You should. They won't like it. They don't have to like it. They have to know that a Sidelobe from their own relay buoy reached a human patrol frigate before their own dispatch acknowledged the call. They have to know that a species with no obligation, no jurisdiction, and no compatible coupling specifications repaired a Drevani freighter engine in 90 minutes. They have to know that 22 hours would have been too late. Cannies. What? When we reach Vareth Minor, the Colony Medical Authority is going to ask why the full cargo shipment arrived intact. They expected half, after you dropped out of formation. Vorth looked at the engine temperature readout, 68 degrees and holding. The adapter sleeve was doing its job. Wen's 40-minute machining work was holding a Drevani heavy freighter together across the Peloric Deep. Tell them, Vorth said, that the shipment arrived because a human frigate answered a call that was never placed. The convoy reached Vareth Minor at 22:31 local. 12 ships, all cargo intact, all engines running. The approach to Vareth Minor told the story before any words could. The colony's orbital station was running on minimal power, half its docking lights dark, its traffic control broadcasting on a single frequency instead of the standard 3. The planet below showed the scars of a plague that had been killing for months. Reduced atmospheric traffic, darkened settlement grids in the northern hemisphere, the telltale heat signatures of mass quarantine facilities glowing in the infrared. Vorth had delivered cargo to 47 colonies in his career. He had never seen a colony that looked this tired from orbit. The docking master at Vareth Minor Station contacted the convoy before they had even entered the approach corridor. His voice was thin, exhausted, the voice of a man who had been working double shifts for weeks. Drevani convoy, confirm cargo manifest. Are you carrying the Tessarine shipment? Full shipment, Delen Roth replied from the Terrace of Winds. 12 vessels, 400 tons across 2 holds. The docking master's voice broke, just for a second, just a crack in the professional register, a human moment from an alien throat. Then he was back. Dock at priority bays 1 through 4. Medical teams are standing by. We've been waiting. The Shelf of Tides docked under her own power at 70% thrust, and the medical compounds were offloaded beginning at 22:48, within the 6-hour viability window by a margin that Vorth preferred not to calculate because it would make him ill. He stood at the cargo bay doors and watched the Vareth Minor medical teams work. They moved with the desperate efficiency of people who had been counting the hours until this shipment arrived, unpacking canisters with hands that shook not from weakness, but from the adrenaline of knowing that the dying might stop now. The Colony Medical Authority did ask. A Drevani administrator named Council Vedish, wearing the formal gray robes of the Vareth Minor Provisional Government, came aboard the Shelf of Tides 2 hours after docking with a data tablet and a list of questions about the engine failure, the convoy separation, and the repair. Vorth told him everything, the 3 dead engines, the cracked coupling, Paulith's improvised thermal shielding, the decision to break formation, the Sidelobe, the Terran frigate, Commander Reith, Chief Engineer Delgado, Machinist Wen and her 40-minute adapter sleeve. Counsel Vedish listened with the careful stillness of a bureaucrat, hearing something that did not fit in any of his forms. "Let me understand," Vedish said. The distress hail was addressed to Drevani Corridor Dispatch. "Correct." And a Terran vessel intercepted it via an unintended emission pattern from our own relay infrastructure. The Sidelobe correct. And they responded without being asked. Without being asked, without jurisdiction, without compatible equipment. They machined an adapter on my ship's lathe and bolted a Terran coupling blank into a Drevani engine mount. Vedish looked at his data tablet. Vorth could see him trying to find the right field, the right category, the right form code for an event that the Trade Authority had never anticipated, because the Trade Authority's entire jurisdictional framework assumed that help came from designated sources through designated channels in designated timeframes. Nobody had designated a sidelobe. "I will need to file this under unregistered foreign assistance," Vedish said finally. "File it however you need to. The Trade Authority will want to review the coupling repair. They may have concerns about non-certified components in a Drevani engine. The non-certified component saved 400 tons of medicine and will save thousands of lives at this colony. Tell the Trade Authority that." Vedish made a note on his tablet. Then he looked up. "Captain Cannies, in your professional judgment, would this cargo have arrived if the Terran vessel had not responded?" Vorth thought about 22 hours. He thought about the coupling cracking further, the engine seizing, the environmental systems failing, the tessarine compounds degrading in their temperature-sensitive canisters. He thought about the amber crest hovering alongside, too small to tow, able only to take on survivors if the shelf of tides went dark. "No," Vorth said, "it would not." Vedish wrote that down. He made 3 more notes, asked 2 more procedural questions about the adapter sleeve's material composition and the Terran coupling blank certification status, and then paused. "There is one more thing, Captain. The colony's chief medical officer asked me to convey something." Vedish's formal demeanor softened, just slightly, just enough to be visible around the edges. "The first tessarine treatments were administered this morning. 17 patients in critical care received the compounds within 4 hours of your docking. 3 of them were children. The chief medical officer asked me to tell you that without the full shipment, those 3 children would not have received treatment today. Perhaps not at all." Vorth said nothing. There was nothing to say. 3 children. 3 temperatures in cargo bay 3 that had stayed nominal because an engine was running, because a coupling had been replaced, because a machinist had cut an adapter sleeve, because a comm operator had caught a degraded sidelobe, because a relay buoy's antenna had physics. The chain was that long, the chain was that thin. And at the far end of it, 3 Drevani children were alive this morning who would not have been. "I will include that in my report as well," Vedish said. "Do." After the bureaucrat left, Vorth sat in his quarters aboard the docked shelf of tides and drafted a personal message. Not a report, not a filing, a message. It was addressed to Commander Anara Reith, Terran Maritime Patrol Vessel Blackwater Run, via Terran Emergency Band 14.7, the frequency Reith had given him. He spent a long time composing it. The words did not come easily. Vorth Cannies was a merchant captain, not a diplomat, and the Drevani language was precise in ways that made gratitude difficult. The Drevani word for thank you carried a formal obligation component, an implication that the thanked party was owed a reciprocal service, that the ledger must be balanced, that the relationship was now transactional. That was not what he wanted to say. He erased the message 3 times. On the 4th attempt, he wrote it in the simplest possible terms. "Commander Reith, the cargo reached Verath Minor. The colony will receive treatment. My engine is holding. Your chief engineer Delgado told me that a broken coupling and a hold full of medicine was not a jurisdiction question. He was right. It was not. I have been a merchant captain for 31 years, and in all that time I have never received help from a vessel that I did not call, on a frequency I did not use, in a space that was not theirs. I did not know that was something that could happen. I know it now. Canny's Shelf of Tides. He sent it. He did not expect a reply. The Terran Maritime Patrol was, by all accounts, a small service that operated in the margins of human space, the vast, empty stretches between shipping lanes, where nothing happened most of the time and everything happened in the moments that mattered. Commander Reith and her crew were probably already back on patrol, running standard sweeps of the Peloric margin, listening to the background hiss of deep space for the next degraded signal that wasn't addressed to them. A reply came 6 hours later. It was short. Captain Canny's glad the cargo made it. Wen says to tell your engineer the adapter sleeve is rated for 18 months of continuous operation, so get a proper replacement coupling before then. Also, she says your lathe is a relic and she respects that. Delgado says the star torque pattern is in the Terran Standard Maintenance Manual, Chapter 14, Section 7, if your trade authority wants it. The coupling inspection interval recommendation stands. 4 years. Will be on the margin. Reith Blackwater Run. Vorith read it twice. Then he sat in his quarters and looked at the bulkhead of his ship, the riveted plating, the decades-old weld seams, the weight of a vessel that had crossed the Peloric Deep 17 times and had nearly not made it on the 18th. Paulith found him there an hour later. She was still wearing engine grease on her hands. She always was. The Colony Medical Authority confirms first treatments begin tomorrow morning, she said. Vorith nodded. Captain, Paulith leaned against the doorframe. Delgado left his torque wrench, the star pattern one. I think it was deliberate. Why do you think that? Because he cleaned it and set it on my workbench before he left. People don't clean tools they're forgetting. Vorith considered this. A torque wrench cleaned, placed deliberately on a Drevani engineer's workbench by a human engineer who would probably never return to this ship or this system or this corner of the deep. He also left the ring gauge, Paulith said, and 2 spare coupling blanks, standard Terran bore with a note. What does the note say? Paulith pulled a small piece of Terran standard maintenance paper from her overalls pocket and handed it to Vorith. The handwriting was blocky, practical, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who wrote parts orders and repair logs. It said, in case the Sidelobe works twice, Delgado. Vorith held the note for a long time. He held it in the quiet of his quarters, aboard a ship that was still running on an adapter sleeve machined in 40 minutes by a woman named Wen, in a system where 400 tons of medicine were being unpacked for a colony that had been dying until this morning. He folded the note carefully and put it in the drawer of his desk, next to the navigation charts and the convoy manifests, and the 31 years of careful, methodical, jurisdiction-respecting trade authority documentation that had never once produced a result as fast, as competent, or as quietly generous as a single human frigate answering a call that was never placed. The Shelf of Tides departed Verath Minor 3 days later. In those 3 days, Paulith performed a full inspection of the remaining 3 dead engines. Engines 1 and 2 were beyond field repair, the bearing seizure, and the first coupling failure had caused secondary damage to the reaction chambers that required yard facilities. Engine 3's coupling could be replaced with one of the spare Terran blanks Delgado had left, using the same adapter sleeve technique. Paulith machined the second adapter sleeve herself, on the same lathe Wen had used. She used Wen's ring gauge. She used Delgado's star pattern torque sequence. The installation took her 3 hours longer than Wen's 40 minutes, but Paulith was learning, and she was Drevani, and Drevani engineers measured twice for every 1 time a human measured. When she was done, The shelf of tides had 2 running engines instead of 1, 50% power. Enough to make the return transit at standard speed, without borrowing time from thermal paste. The ship departed with her hold empty, her crew rested, her captain carrying a folded note in his desk drawer, and a frequency Terran Emergency Band 14.7 memorized for the first time in his life. The Terran patrol chart sat in the navigation database under a category that had not existed 3 days ago. Paulith had mounted the star-pattern torque wrench on her workbench wall. She used it on every repair. When her apprentice asked why a Drevani engineer used a Terran tool, Paulith told her the story. The apprentice asked why the humans came when they were not called. Paulith thought about it. Because the Sidelobe was there, she said. And they were listening. The apprentice asked what a Sidelobe was. Paulith smiled in the way that Drevani engineers smile slowly, with the corners of the mouth barely moving, the expression entirely in the eyes. It's a leak, she said, a signal that goes where it was not aimed, an accident of physics. She picked up the Terran torque wrench and went back to work. The best kind of accident,